First of all, I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I know some of you here, I don't know everybody in the room. I grew up at Rookup, and as a child I used to go around and visit elderly people in the village, and I loved to listen to their stories. The fact that they had sweeties in the house was just an aside. They used to tell me all kinds of things when I was there, and a lot of people liked having visitors and just sitting and chatting. In the school holidays, I spent a lot of time on my grandfather's farm, and they lived at Garrigle near Ulston. They had dairy farm, they had sheep, they had hens, a typical small farm in the North Pennines. As a teenager, a friend got me into family history, and that's something I've enjoyed ever since. And family history research is more the sort of thing that Ian's been talking about. You're looking at documents to find out dates, ages, names, such like. Once I learned about the people, most of my ancestors were miners and farmers and quarrymen in the North Pennine area. I wanted to find out more about the places they lived and the jobs that they did. I started working at Killip with Ian, and I worked there for quite a few years. And I was very lucky to have some excellent tutors there, and they taught me about social history, lead mining history, and geology, and a lot of really good background stuff. From there I went on to do archaeology, and I know Rob from archaeology, he was one that's responsible for that really, taking me on a lovely walk up to Bolliot one afternoon and looking at all the remains up there. I was fascinated by that, and I ended up doing a part-time degree in archaeology, a master's, while I was working at Killip, and I had young children as well. So I've always been used to doing quite a lot of things and quite a lot of different things at the same time. So I'm quite good at juggling. Writing is something that I've always wanted to do. It's always been in the back of my mind that I'd like to write a book. But I didn't really know what I wanted to write a book on. And it was only a few years back when we were working on the Grove Rake, trying to save the mining head frame at Grove Rake, that I started to actually sit down and write. I was involved with the group in the campaign to save that. And towards the end, I became a spokesperson for that. It was quite a steep learning curve, really, dealing with land agents and such like. And I found that I needed something to do that would just be sort of distance from that little bit. So all this time I was doing this, I was also working full-time, running a business. So I decided to start sitting down and writing. And the characters just came to me, the location came to me, everything. And because of the background, Weardale seemed to be the most logical place to write about. To write anything historical, you need to have a very good understanding of both the place and the place at that time. You can't start writing about characters until you've got that background. I did recently start to write a chapter on set in Missouri in the USA. I've never been to Missouri. I got as far as this guy stepping down off the train, and then it just totally dried up. I couldn't visualise what he could see when he got off the train. And for me to be able to write about something, I need to be able to do that, so that's important to me. And when I write about Weardale, and the people there, and the farming, and the mining, I know about that. I can sit there, I can imagine it, and I'm actually there with the people when I'm writing. The Lead Miner's Daughter was published in July, so it's not quite 3 months since it came out. It's doing very well, and I thoroughly enjoyed writing all of it, but especially bringing the characters to life, because characters are in fiction, that they're not based on real people, but there's little elements of real people in all of them, because they're built up of your experiences, people that you've met, things you've heard, things you've seen. And it's very difficult to sort of create characters that people care about. If you look at book reviews, one of the biggest criticisms is that the characters were very 2D. There wasn't enough depth there to make them realistic. And what all writers aim to do is make the reader care about the characters. Once that happens, the reader will carry on reading and they'll want to know more. And I think it's brilliant. There's quite a few people come to me after they've read the book and say, I want to know what happened to Connie or to Mrs. Peart or to Ben. They want to know more. So already I'm working on the sequel, which will be out next year. But you need to get people hooked. So to start off with the character, each of the characters, I think now just ask, people who have read the book so far, how many characters do you think are named in The Lead Miner's Daughter? This is not the washer boys, the washerman, who hasn't got a name. People with names. A lot more. Yeah.
30.
20 or so?
Higher.
30.
More. I actually counted them up the other night because I was interested to know how many there were. There's actually 51 named characters in the book, which surprised me. And if you read anything about writing books and writing characters, at this stage you should have around about 20, so that was a good guess. Out of those 51, most of those build up the community that these people live in, because people don't live in isolation unless they're a castaway. They live in communities. And you need that background there, again, to create a realistic living arrangement. Ian mentioned about the communities when he was a postman and in Weardale. Weardale is very much a community place. So with each of these characters, the first starting point was really to write a profile. And that was very much like what you have with Elizabeth Ord, dates, names, places, and not very much really, but you start off with the name. That's not as easy as you would think, because that name has got to fit in to the time and place. For me, that was quite simple because of all the research I'd done in the past. I knew typical Dales names. So we've got Elliots and we've got Pearts in there, and lots of other names that would have appeared in the place at the time. If you just choose names at random, you could get it totally wrong. And the exception to that would be people who are professionals coming into the area. So you might have vicars and doctors, school teachers, solicitors that have got more unusual names from outside the area. I was going to use Forbes as an example, actually, that, you know, I haven't found any Forbes on the early censuses in the 19th century, but there was actually a vicar called Forbes that worked at Rupert in the early 19th century.
Nothing to do with me.
Well before your time. Something that Weardale people have done for a long time is use surnames as Christian names. And that's something that I wanted to show. It's not in The Lead Miner's Daughter, but the main character in the next book is called Elliot Dawson. Dawson is a typical Dales name. There's a lot of them up the Dale. Elliot, again, is a local name, but also is one that people can relate to because it is used as a Christian name as well in modern times. One of my pet hates is when I'm reading a book and you get through, the characters' names are, I read quite a lot of Scottish books and Irish books, and they've got Gaelic names, and it's very difficult. You know, every time you come across the name, you sort of hesitate and try and think, how is it pronounced? And on purpose, I chose fairly simple names. I've got Toms and Marys and Joes. And you don't want to slow the reader down when they're reading. You know, keep it simple. So I did choose the names very, very carefully. The next thing on your profile, it's a bit like filling a form out: name, age, sex. The age and sex of the character will depend very much on where they fit into the story. Occupations have got to fit in, again, with the location. And in Weardale, in the 19th century, it's pretty much lead mining, quarrying, farming. There were a surprising number of innkeepers, a few shopkeepers and various other things, but there wasn't a lot of different industries. You wouldn't find a master sea mariner in Weardale. It just wouldn't happen. So again, you need to, for them to be realistic, they've got to fit. You could have a retired sea mariner, I suppose, come up to live in the Dales. So basically that's your 2D character, and you want a lot more than that to make them believable, to bring them to life. And that's where you came on with Diana. She was a much more rounded person than Elizabeth Ord. Both very interesting ladies, but one you wanted to know more about, one you got a feel for. And to make them realistic, you really have to get inside the head of the person you're writing about. And it's okay to have some 2D characters, I should say, in your book, because not everybody is fully rounded in the book. Can any of you remember Anne Routledge in The Lead Miner's Daughter? She's a 2D character. She's just there because she plays a very small part. She's the wife of Ned Routledge. She lives at Wellfield Farm at Westgate, and she's recently had her first child. That's all you know about her. That's all you need to know about her. When you get to the 12 main characters in the story, the people who actually play an important role in it, they are much more rounded. And you have to understand how they would think and how they would react to events, what they would say, and how they would speak. Everybody speaks differently depending on where they've been brought up, how they've been educated. People have speech mannerisms. I'm trying to think of an example from the book. Mrs. Peart in the book, for those that read it, she's an older lady. She has a religious background, and whenever she gets upset, she uses the word Lord a lot. So it's, good Lord, what's the world coming to? And she only does it when she's upset. She doesn't do it all of the time. And PC Robert Emerson, he is quite shy when he gets to meet people originally, but he thinks that it's part of his job to talk to people. So he fills the silences in by repeating himself. But he only ever does it when he first meets people. He doesn't do it when there's anything important going on. He's much more logical and thinking of things through. And the speech has got to fit the person, but it's also got to fit that time and that location as well. So you might get some dialect words coming in there. I've tried to keep those to a minimum in The Lead Miner's Daughter because, again, dialect words can slow readers down. So there's an occasional G missed off, you know, it might be getting rather than getting. That's not going to slow anyone down, they're sort of used to seeing that. But the only exception to that is Owd Ted, who is an old farmer, he's an old shepherd up in the Dale, and he has a lot of the character that I remember from the people when I was young. It built into him, so I've allowed him to use dialect. And it's just a small part of the book, but I think for me it's one of the nice bits. I like that part. In one part, Connie calls Mary a goody two-shoes. And there's quite a few phrases like that I actually looked up to make sure that they were in use before the novel was set in 1872. And it was, so it was fine to use. But there were a few things that I took out of there because I realised that they were out of that place. One of them was he'd blown it, which is a sort of a World War II expression. And I wasn't aware of that, but, you know, I was very careful to look things up and to make sure that they did fit. I read a book recently that was set in London, Regency London, and it was written by an American author. And she had used the word bletch 3 times in the first half of the book. And do anyone know what the word bletch means? I had to look it up, so don't worry about not understanding it. It's actually a very modern slang word in America for yuck. It was the wrong time, it was the wrong place, and it spoilt the book for me because she hadn't done her homework. Something else with the characters is when the story moves on. I don't want to mention events in the story because I hope those that haven't read it yet will read it. The characters must develop with what happens to them. In real life, people change, things happen, they move on, but that event will have had some effect on that person, and that needs to show as well to be realistic. And the main characters have also got to appeal to the reader. I read a review, not one of my reviews, but I did read a review recently Well, somebody said the main character was so obnoxious I didn't want to spend any more time with her. And your reader's going to sit for several hours with these people. They need to like them. If it's a love story, you've got to be able to see the attraction that the two people have for each other. If you can't see that, it doesn't really work. And there are some things with historical novels you might want to sort of not mention too much. Some of the attitudes towards things we have now are very different to attitudes people had in the 19th century. And one of those is hygiene. People didn't bath particularly often in the 19th century. And one of the old ladies that I used to visit told me that she used to have a bath once a month, and that was it. You might want to avoid that when you're talking about your love story in the 19th century, that your hero hasn't had a bath for a month. And no story is complete without a villain or two. And when I said you've got to get into the heads of your characters, that's the baddies as well as the goodies. And that's quite an enlightening process to do that. And each one of the characters I feel as though I know intimately in that story. I could sit down with them and have a conversation. I'm really proud of the people that I have created, and I hope that you've enjoyed them too. And I think the biggest difference with the fiction and the factual, because I have done a little bit of factual research in the past as well, is that you are in control. You don't have a letter that you've got to say, those are her words. You write the words, you put the words into that person's mouth. You control what they do. So you have total freedom to invent people, to get rid of people. You're acting God, really, when you're writing fiction. So, I think that's it.